Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar live demonstration, CyberSaint Crosswalking, NIST SP 853 to ISO 27001. My name is Ethan Bresnahan. I'm the marketing director here at CyberSaint, and today I'm excited to be joined by CyberSaint VP of Solutions Architecture, Steve Torino, and Senior Sales Engineer, Michael Blumreich. We're so glad that you could join us for today's webinar, and with that, I will hand things off to Steve.
Hi, my name is Steve Torino, and I'm Vice President of Solution Architecture here at CyberSaint. I want to thank you for attending this webinar and also provide some background information before we jump into a demonstration of the solution. Crosswalking has been a longstanding challenge in the industry. The reality is that organizations are subject to more than one cybersecurity framework or standard of practice, depending on things like the jurisdictions where they do business, the industries in which they participate, and the types of customers with whom they wish to do business. Most of these standards are covering domains and controls that overlap, at least to some extent. And in theory, this overlap should make things easier to the extent that we can kind of be sure we comply with the control from one framework. We should be able to map it to controls from another framework and know that we satisfied that requirement as well. In practice, it's a bit more complicated. Although the controls across two or more frameworks may cover similar content, they often have subtle differences. So for example, let's take vulnerability scanning as an example. A framework like NIST might allow for the frequency of vulnerability scanning to be customized to an organization-defined frequency, whereas the corresponding control from another framework may specify the frequency at which vulnerability scans are to be run, so something like once a week or once a month. Yes, those controls do map to each other, but the subtle difference in frequency makes them not an exact match. Another example could be control inheritance. So most of us by now are probably using some cloud services to operate our business. One of the benefits that comes with that is inheriting certain security controls, such as server patching and an infrastructure as a service model, for example. However, there are other controls for which a shared accountability model applies. In other words, we might inherit part of a control from a CSP, but still have to demonstrate requirements around things like maybe access controller configurations in-house. So what's really critical here is to understand the gap between any two frameworks. And organizations have taken various approaches to finding these gaps or doing crosswalks in order to make their lives easier, because as anybody who's done these exercises knows, it can be really challenging and time-consuming. Larger, more complex organizations might roll out something like a large common controls framework, or basically a superset of sorts that can be manually applied across dozens or hundreds of frameworks even. And others might try a method like to rely on the limited set of publicly available crosswalks that are published by authoritative sources like CIS, AICPA, even the informative references to the CSF from NIST. Unfortunately, this is very limited and not available for most frameworks at all. And yet others might work with consultants, bring consultants in and have an engagement to do the crosswalking that they need. What you're going to see today is a demonstration of CyberSaint's unique approach to crosswalking. So whether it's an example of how we can leverage pre-published templates to automate those industry accepted mappings just at the click of a button, or how to use our patented natural language processing technology to create your own templates from any framework to any other framework by identifying control associations with AI provided confidence levels, you're going to see a real-world solution that's been custom built to automate the manual and time-consuming process of crosswalking controls across frameworks. I hope you enjoy the demo.
In order to complete a crosswalk within the CyberStrong platform, we're going to start by going to the administration area. So you can do so by clicking in the upper right-hand corner on administration. From here, you're going to be taken by default to the Manage Assessments page. And this is where you can start the crosswalk process. So in order to do that, first, we're going to find the crosswalk icon for the parent assessment, or that assessment that you want to essentially crosswalk from to create a new assessment. So we're going to find that in the actions column here along the far right. In this case, I'm going to crosswalk from the NIST 853 assessment here. Going to click on that crosswalk assessment icon. From here, I'm going to select a framework that I'm wanting to crosswalk into and essentially create that new assessment from. In this case, I'm going to select ISO 27001. So I'm going to click on that option. Next, I am able to choose from some different mapping options. So through our natural language processing models, we have a confidence score associated with the mappings. And in this case, what this is going to do is essentially provide mappings of from those controls that have a confidence score of over 80%, over 90%. If there are other templates available, you'd be able to select that. Or if you want to select your own mappings, you can choose an empty template. That is what I'm going to choose here. You'll now be taken to your next step. You can go through a couple of different options at this point. You can go control by control, selecting the mappings based on the confidence scores, or you can select add top mappings for each control. That's what I'm going to do here. At this point, I'm going to go and I can review some of those mappings. I can choose additional mappings, select, deselect, go control by control if I want. That is not necessary, however, when selecting the add top mappings, and you can go directly to next step. So here I'm going to go to my next step. At this point, the only other requirements is that you provide a name for the new assessment, and then make a choice of whether or not you want to keep the assessment synced with that parent assessment. So in this case, I'm not going to do that, but I will show you what a synced assessment looks like momentarily. So I'm going to provide a name and then click submit to create the new assessment. You'll see here that we now have an 82% project completed assessment due to the crosswalk itself. We can go and see what those mappings look like here by clicking into the controls and then going into an individual control itself. This is auditable in nature. You'll notice that we have the crosswalk history here. And, if you're wanting to see what that overarching control is and the control actions, you can review that. The difference between this and a synced crosswalk and a synced assessment is you can notice here at the child assessment, I'm still able to make changes. If I go to a synced assessment, then what that is going to essentially do is you're no longer making changes at the child level. You can do that if you choose, but any changes will automatically roll down from the parent assessment. So I can go back again, crosswalk history. You'll notice here, can't make changes. I go to the parent control and I make changes at this level. And then at this point, I can go back to my child control and you'll notice that current score has now been adjusted. Really, with the crosswalking in system within the CyberStrong solution, this does allow you to assess once, apply to many, do so systematically, and is auditable all throughout the process to save time, effort, and to really make the assessment and compliance process that much more seamless.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. As always, if you're interested in learning more about CyberSaint's AI-backed crosswalking capabilities, please feel free to reach out, info@cybersaint.io, or visit us at cybersaint.io. We'll see you soon.